isn't it absolutely a disgrace that they have not requested him to come back? You know Trump can bring this person back, and he has not done so.
Well, I'm not going to condemn him for that. I can agree with you that this appears to be an error and maybe even be morally questionable, but I'm not obligated to condemn my guy. But
I mean, first of all, I just want to be clear about where I stood. I condemn Joe Biden's corrupt pardons of his own family. I said that because actually I do expect people who stand on principle to call out their own side. I think that's no more, no less than we can do. I think not doing that makes someone a hack.
But the election was over by then.
Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description. First of all, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You know, I often am like annoying people on Twitter with my little lib takes, my lib lawyer takes, and it is nice every now and then to catch one, you know, hook, line, and sinker, and to get someone who's willing to engage, who perhaps thinks a little differently. So to catch people up, why don't you give yourself a little introduction, and then I can talk about why we're here.
I'm Ron Coleman. I'm sometimes called the Trump apologist, and I might even be guilty of that, especially because he's my client. So I get paid to apologize for him sometimes. But politically speaking, I am pro-Trump, warts and all. I do acknowledge the existence of warts. I'm a lawyer who has been involved in politics for his entire adult life. I was formerly partners with Harmeet Dillon. I'm not anymore, which gives me a great deal of freedom that I didn't have for the previous 4 years or so. But when it comes to polemics on the internet, I pretty much recognize this as a sum zero game. It's us and them. Intermediate positions are fine for dorm room discussions, but it's a two-party system. The other party hates us, will kill us, enslave us, and here I am.
Thank you for that introduction. And can you describe the painting behind you? I'm really interested in it.
It is a World War I era pitch for supporting libraries. Public library books are free.
Interesting.
Knowledge wins. And it was published evidently by the American Library Association before it switched its main task to transing children in middle school.
I see. Appreciate that. I just wanted you to explain the painting, Ron. All right, we didn't get a follow right away. No, I appreciate it. A little background on me. I'm a lawyer. I'm just an internet lawyer guy who comments on things. I go by Pisco, so I'm not yet publicly doxing myself. And certainly I'm not been in the game as long as you have, Ron. All right, but I do have sort of seen your appearances and had a lot of fun watching the Laid Back Law program every Friday, where you and some other lawyers appear. Yeah. And listen, we take some fun at your guys' expense every now and then. But I think, number one, thanks again for coming. And to give you some, the folks, the audience, some background, I reached out in a reply to Ron on one of these cases, on one of basically the recent case, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, to see if Ron was willing to come on and have a chat about that case, perhaps some other cases, perhaps some Trump-related cases, and he was willing to do so.
And it should be very clear, I'm not paying close attention to any of them. I just, that was a pure troll, because who was it that you called illiterate?
Will Chamberlain. Yeah, that guy's a hack.
Okay, well, he's illiterate. Maybe you're illiterate. but in the spirit of internet, internet mixing it up, here I am.
Listen, I don't take it personally, but thanks. No, I appreciate that, because as a fellow attorney, I really think that what you got here is untenable, counselor. I think that what Trump represents to the rule of law, and I think the Abrego Garcia case is a perfect example of it, is nothing short of the end of the republic and the institution of authoritarianism. And I don't know how anyone who respects the republic can stand up for the guy, given all of his malfeasance, all of his authoritarian ways, but really, as shown in the recent immigration practices in these cases. It's absolutely condemnable. It is deplorable. I can put in a bunch of adjectives there, but really, are you actually paying close attention to what's happening? Because it's insane, and it's corrupt, and it's authoritarian.
So you oppose the statute that gives him essentially plenary power to do what he did, right?
Do I oppose the Alien Enemies Act, or do I oppose what statute are you referring to?
What statute do we understand him to be operating under?
He was not deported pursuant to any statute at all. This is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. If we're referencing that case, he was not deported pursuant to any law. It was a completely lawless deportation that's not premised either on the Alien Enemies Act or the Immigration Nationality Act. Completely lawless.
Well, hold on a second. This is the Garcia who already had a deportation order?
This is the Garcia who was granted withholding of removal in 2019.
Right, but he was subject to a deportation order, right? Which he just disobeyed?
No, there was a granting of withholding of removal by the immigration judge in 2019. And obviously, once you grant a withholding of removal, then there is no valid final order of removal which can be applied as to Kilmar Abrego Garcia. In the process of the litigation, they conceded removability in that he had no legal status. But obviously, there are other methods by which you can defensively apply for relief. And he applied for withholding of removal and was granted it by the Trump administration IG.
By the Trump administration IG?
Yep.
My understanding is that he was, let's see here. Why was he deported? He was, right, designated MS-13, denied it.
Wait, you don't believe that,
Court
do you?
nonetheless concluded that he was. Chief Justice Roberts agreed Monday to pause the deadline for the right. So how did he come to the U.S.? He wasn't illegal. He had a work permit. I mean, it seems to me, look, I think that there is a problem with making a ruling, with conducting a sort of sweep in this way. It does seem that I want to understand what you just said about the Trump IG. Who's the Trump IG?
It's this woman, Maria.
Inspector General, right?
No, so IJ, an immigration judge.
Immigration judge.
Yes. Her name is Comans or something, Marie Coleman. Oh, sorry, no, that's not the IJ. That's the one for the Mahmoud Khalil case. My bad. I actually don't know who the IJ was in that case, but the IGs work under the Department of Justice and the Executive Office for Immigration Review under the Attorney General, and so they're not Article 3 judges. And it was a Trump administration era granting of withholding of removal, and everyone, including the government and now the Supreme Court.
Previous administration, right?
Yes, version 1. Which is why, by the way, this whole business about MS-13 is absolute trash. And everyone who is repeating it, including the Attorney General of the United States, including the Vice President of the United States, including everyone in the administration, is a decrepit liar. I mean, we're talking about someone who, yes, I mean, there's absolutely no basis to assert that there's a reason to believe that this person is associated with MS-13. What they claim to and what they cling to is the pure hearsay statement of an individual who said that Abrego Garcia was part of the New York outfit of MS-13, even though he's never lived in New York, even though that admission or that hearsay statement was not credited by the police at the time, even though the person who recorded that statement is someone who has problems in terms of corruption himself. If you look it up, he was like paying a prostitute or something, or basically it's all garbage all the way down. And even the Fourth Circuit opinion that looked at the evidence says it's basically just that hearsay statement and the fact that he was wearing Chicago Bulls clothing that they determined that he was a member of MS-13. But it's complete garbage, and they have not tried to develop that at the district court level. And furthermore,
but they're not. Is the isn't isn't the only occasion to develop that at the district court level at habeas proceeding?
No.
I mean,
In this, so they would have been well within their rights before the district court in this case to present facts before the record. And in fact, the district court asked what facts.
But were they obligated? But were they obligated to?
I don't know if they're obligated to show it. Whether he's a member of MS-13 or not, the deportation was illegal. It's kind of immaterial, but it's just to the optical point. You mentioned MS-13, but the truth is there's not a good basis to believe this guy's a member of MS-13. And if he was, right, the administration claims he's a prominent member of MS-13. What I meant to believe is that in 2019, the Trump administration just let out a prominent member of MS-13 in 2019. They let him get a work permit. They just let him into the country. Does that sound right to you, that the Trump administration would let out an MS-13 member, didn't raise a stink about it then, didn't appeal his withholding claim? It's all bullshit, man.
The first Trump administration, I have no problem believing that at all. I mean,
really?
Trump never really obtained control over the government in any meaningful way. So that doesn't really surprise me. But legally speaking, I mean, I have the news. Can I throw something up? Because apparently there was just a ruling from Judge Sinis.
Yep.
And it goes something like this. Judge Sinis issues 2 orders in the El Salvadoran case. And that's a constitutional law issue. And then court continues to assume Garcia is held in El Salvador. Oops. My hotel reservation instead. Take it off. Yeah.
Well,
anyway,
let's get to brass tacks.
Than
yeah, so let's get to brass tacks here. I mean, everyone concedes that this deportation was illegal. The 9-0, one of the 9-0 decisions of the Supreme Court is that this is an illegal, lawless deportation. Lawless.
Where does it say that in the...
Go to the Supreme
Show me that where it says that in the...
Okay, so this is the opinion of the court. It says, on March 15th, the United States removed Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia from the United States to El Salvador. This is on the very first page. The quote, the United States acknowledges that Abrego Garcia was subject to a withholding order forbidding his removal to El Salvador, and that the removal to El Salvador was therefore illegal. That is the unanimous court. Illegal.
Is that the same thing as lawless? Did they use the word lawless? Because that would be that's a very important. That's a very important polemical point.
I take lawless regardless of the polemical point.
All kinds of, they said that it was unlawful, right? They said it was.
I take lawless to be unlawful and to be illegal. I take them to be synonymous.
It's not the same. It's not the same thing.
You're going to have to explain that difference.
Lawless. Well, they're 2 different words. Unlawful means in violation of the law. Lawless means unconstrained by any concept of legal process whatsoever.
Okay,
basically,
to the extent that distinction matters, to the extent that distinction, you care about it. For me, it's a distinction in this context without much of a difference. But I'm happy to use your term and the court's term, illegal. It was an illegal deportation.
It was unlawful.
It was unlawful.
All right, so the system works. The Supreme Court says that it was an unlawful. It was an unlawful act. Evidently, it was a screw up.
That's what they claim.
And as a general rule, well, I mean, until it's proved otherwise, we'll go with that. I mean, it seems. I don't. Do you have any reason to believe that the Trump administration would choose to die on the hill of a guy who apparently should not have been removed? Like, what? There are so many people eligible for removal. Why would you go this way?
I think this administration is trying to see what it can get away with. So, for example, in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, they're trying to deport on the basis of the this provision of the INA that makes deportable people who the Secretary of State designates as a threat to the foreign policy of the United States. And in that case, it's like pure conclusory language in their 2-page memo that Marco Rubio drafted up. And so they're really trying to stretch the limits of their authority here. And so, yeah, I wouldn't put it past. I can't prove it as we sit here that they would set up a case that was, as positive for the people who are against the Trump administration. Let me just finish what I'm saying. I can't prove that. All I know is that it was an illegal deportation, and I think we can agree on that. Unlawful deportation.
Yeah. Yes. So it was, and the Supreme Court said. So the question now is, what can the courts do? What can the court or the government do about it?
Well, that I think is a legal question. Good.
Well, it seems like it appears that the Supreme Court is hinting to Judge Sinis that she cannot order the Trump administration to do something with respect to a person who has been deported.
Unlawfully deported
in the United States.
Yeah, so I want us to get to that because that's kind of one of the legal issues here, and people have made a muck, and including Will Chamberlain, I think, have been dishonest about the what that ruling actually says. I think actually the way you put it is maybe I wouldn't totally agree with it, but certainly better than how Will Chamberlain put it. But this is the question I want to ask first, and like what I want us to run the ground on. Isn't it condemnable? Isn't it absolutely disgraceful that they acknowledge that this individual was subject to an illegal removal? He should not have been removed. It was against the law to remove him. That, in fact, he was granted withholding under the Trump administration for, in fear for his life. They've sent him to an infamous detention center where these people barely get any time out of their cells at all. They have no access to no stimulus, wide scale reports of abuse. Isn't it absolutely a disgrace that they have not requested him to come back? Trump can bring this person back, and he has not done so. Isn't that a disgrace, sir?
Is it more of a disgrace than the other? I'm not going. You think I'm going to do a whataboutism? I'm not. Is it more of a disgrace than the other illegal immigrants who were sent there, but without the problem that you've described?
I would say it's more of a disgrace. It's more of a disgrace because, at least in the case of the alleged alien enemies from Venezuela who were sent to El Salvador to rot away in the gulag, at least for those individuals, someone can make even a facial argument, oh, we didn't know that we had to provide these people with basic due process. I mean, that is a ridiculous proposition, but even I think bad faith attorneys even, I'm not saying that you're bad faith attorneys, but bad faith attorneys can say, oh, we didn't know that we had to give these people even an opportunity to file a habeas petition. In this case, there is no possible way for us to think that they thought that this was legal. They claim it was a mistake, fine. But in this case, right, it's illegal. That this person should not be there, should not be in Sikot. Right. Isn't it a disgrace?
So we can both agree. So we can both agree. I'm not in the disgrace business, but can we not both agree? But we do both agree that the right thing to do would be for the White House, for the administration, to find a way to get this guy back.
Yes, I agree that we both agree on that. But to the extent that they haven't, right? I agree. But I want to, because what I want us to focus in on first is that I do want to get to the law, but if it's the case, right, that the Trump administration is disclaiming any responsibility here, just as a moral, ethical matter, right? You agree, right? If Trump really wanted this guy back, he could get him back. Can we agree on that?
I don't really know, but it seems to me really probable.
Okay. I mean, he's the president of the United States. He has a good relationship with this guy. They're buddies. He's contracting them. He's paying them money for it. If he really wanted them back, you think Trump couldn't bring them back? He could bring them back.
I would think, just spitballing with you, I'd be really surprised if he couldn't.
So the fact that he has not exercised whatever power he has to bring him back, that is disgraceful. And whether or not you want to call it disgraceful or not, you should condemn him for that.
Well, I'm not going to condemn him for that because just as, I mean, again, remember what I said to you in the beginning. It's ridiculous to expect someone to condemn the politician of the party that he's a member of when the alternative is people who have much more inhuman policies and much more disgraceful policies. So I can agree with you that this appears to be an error and may even be morally questionable, but I'm not obligated to condemn my guy, because just as I don't expect Rachel Maddow to condemn Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. I don't expect that to happen.
I mean, first of all, I just want to be clear about where I stood. I condemned Joe Biden's corrupt pardons of his own family. I said that it was an impeachable, and I condemned him for it. I said, Joe Biden, that was an abuse of power, and your preemptive pardons of your own family were impeachable. I said that because actually I do expect people who stand on principle to call out their own side. I think that's no more, no less than we can do. I think not doing that makes someone a hack.
The election was over by then, wasn't it? The election was over by then, right?
Whether it was or wasn't, what difference does that make? The election is over now. Trump,
because your condemnation was he wasn't running for anything. So now you're just a free agent making moral judgments, which we're all entitled to do.
But there's no election now. But there's no election now.
Oh, there's the election. Donald Trump is not running for re-election, but there is a political battle going on. So there's a political battle going on, and so the question, I think, a fair question for you at this juncture is, what is the remotely moral argument to defend Trump not doing what it appears that reasonable men would say he ought to do? What possible rationale can there be for that? And it may go to what you said, which was that Donald Trump wants to push things as far as he possibly can get away with them. But I can back it off just a couple of clicks from there and suggest that what he may want to do is reassert that the principle that courts cannot tell the executive what to do beyond certain limits, and that limit has been crossed here. And whether or not he reaches that point, and I think he's got the Supreme Court this close to doing that for him, with the back and forth that's gone on over the last couple of days between the District Court and the Supreme Court and the Fourth Circuit, basically waving at the whole thing and not being particularly effectual in either respect. What I think President Trump, and this is entirely me winging it because I have no inside contact,
Yes, you're not speaking in your. Yes, you're speaking as an observer.
Yeah, but my take on this is that what he's probably doing is he wants the Supreme Court to agree with him that he doesn't have to do it, and that if he does it, he'll be a gentleman. And if he doesn't do it, now there is also another argument. If he doesn't do it, even if he gets that and he doesn't do it, then I would have a hard time understanding that.
Well,
I have a hard time understanding that.
I'm happy to move on to the law and to talk about our opinions on what's going on in these cases and to actually talk about these separation of powers issues, because it sounds like you have interesting things to say about it. So I won't linger too much on this condemning point, this moral point, but I just want to really push, though, to make sure what it would take for you to condemn him. So, for example, if it turns out that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is dead, buried on the orders of Bukele, would you condemn him for that?
Would only if I had reason to believe that Donald Trump was responsible for it.
So if you found out that there was an understanding, that's what it would take. It would certainly take Trump to knowingly kill an individual.
That would be lawless. That would be lawless, and I would condemn that. Absolutely, okay. Yes.
But when we reach a level of arbitrary and illegal deportations, and that doesn't cross your threshold, you can't say, for example, you could say something to the effect of, I support.
Arbitrary. Well, it's not arbitrary. They clearly, someone blew it, and they may have blown it on purpose or they may have blown it by accident. But this was a person who had a deportation order.
What stops you from saying? What stops you? I have to be honest. Like, what stops you from saying, I support Trump's agenda, I support Trump's policies, but this action is wrong, and Trump should not. Trump should be getting him back effectively. What? Why can't you? With
Oh, nothing. I say it. I say it right now.
Okay. All right. Okay. Listen.
It was It was wrong. It was wrong, and intention doesn't really matter that much. It's an interesting question, and it might matter if in theory had a Section 1983 claim. Or if there were some legal recourse, intention might matter. But for purposes of what should be done, doesn't really matter. Supreme Court agrees, and everyone familiar with the facts seems to agree. It shouldn't have happened.
Would you tweet at him saying, "Hey, Mr. Trump, I'm a big supporter. Bring him back, sir. Sir, could you bring him back?" Would you tweet out? I'm not saying that you should do it right now, but like, is that something that you'd be like willing to do? Like, for example, I tweeted out at Joe Biden when there are things that I disagree with Joe Biden on. Would you be willing to say something like, if you were to have a conversation with him, or if you were to speak publicly on the matter, would you say, "Mr. Trump, I agree with you in your policy. This is wrong, and I think that you shouldn't do it, and I think you should bring him back"? You wouldn't be willing to do that?
No, I wouldn't. No,
because it would jeopardize politically your side. Is that fair?
It would jeopardize my side politically. Okay. That's right. It's a war, and I'm on this side of the war.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to. Yeah, sorry. I'll let you speak. Sorry.
Okay. No. I actually don't think I had any particularly well lined up words to say.
Okay. I think it's a very interesting question because I understand where the administration lies in terms of there must be some things that are beyond the power of the district courts and about the federal courts. I think that what we have to find out is, where are those limits, and what exactly are they? Where are they, and what are they? So, for example, I think it would be absurd to suggest that the district court could order the president to do a SEAL Team 6 raid to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia back. And if you were to take, for example, effectuate to its logical, most absurd, like greatest meaning, right? The most inclusive meaning of effectuate.
Make it so.
Yeah, right. You would have to, I suppose, invade El Salvador in order to get Mr. Abrego Garcia back. It can't be the case that the district court is empowered with the power to do that. And I think, but that said, right? So I understand these fears. And another example I can bring up is, so imagine that the United States was somehow responsible to have illegally placed someone in Gaza at the time that they were kidnapped or something by Hamas. I think it would also likely, be absurd to think that a district judge could order the United States to engage in negotiations with Hamas under those conditions, one way or the other, right? The Hamas is a foreign, there's no effective control there. You're undermining it sucks. It is something illegal. Same thing with the Russian Federation. Imagine there's a court order from a district judge saying you have to get Brittany Griner back, and Putin's going to know about this injunction or this order, and I can see how it could very quickly get out of hand. And so I take it seriously. I take the separation of powers and the Constitution seriously. I just think it's very different from this case. This case, it appears to be a completely contractual relationship. You said right at the start of this that you acknowledge that Trump actually almost certainly has the power if you wanted to bring him home. It's not like the Brittany Griner situation. It's not like the situation where you're undermining, the negotiations with Hamas. And it can't be the case that the president can just contract away the constitutions and, let's say, put a U.S. citizen in El Salvador and keep paying him to do that and have that be, you can't touch it.
That's right. Reductio ad absurdum. If there are a number of propositions that we will not accept.
Yeah.
One of them is you can't pick someone up off the street, put them into the custody of the United States military.
Yep.
And now it's foreign policy.
Yeah.
That's asinine. That's asinine.
On that we can agree. Okay. Because otherwise they could pick up this judge, throw her to El Salvador, and then no one can do anything about it. That seems absurd.
Right. That's right. And I've actually not been particularly comfortable with that. So the case that came up with Judge Boasberg,
right? The Alien Enemies Act case, for those of you who are following, he's referencing the case in which they like deported 200 or so people who are alleged alien enemies, members of Trinidad, alleged, I should say, who they shipped off to El Salvador. And Judge Boasberg had a oral order to turn the planes around, and they were saying like, that's not good law. They can't force them to do that. But yeah, that's what you're referencing. Sorry.
I found that a little troubling as well. It can't. Now, the problem is Judge Boasberg, who I have a case pending before, but I wouldn't say anything different.
Yeah.
No, it's a civil copyright case, only tangentially involving January 6th.
Really? Wait, what copyright's at issue there? One of the reporters, maybe? Reporters?
No. So one of the lawyers, Dan Hull, one of the lawyers for the defendants, entered into an agreement with an expert on juror attitudes in support of a venue motion, which the motion was, of course, denied because.
Did they want to reuse the expert's report? Did they want to reuse that expert's report somewhere else?
No. Yeah. The problem was that they couldn't pay for it. Like they thought they'd have the money for it, so they made an agreement to buy this report for $30,000, and they didn't come up with the money, and everyone was pointing fingers at the other co-defendants. So Hull ends up as the guy holding the bag, and the plaintiff, in order to add some leverage to the case, turned it into a copyright infringement case. And really, Judge Boasberg could have and should have gotten rid of the copyright claim early on. But instead...
What's the theory of infringement?
It went... That the report is an original work, and that the public... Listen to this. That the publication of the work was filing it in the United States District Court.
Does that count as publication?
Well, I argued, although it didn't really ever get resolved on this issue, that would not be publication.
Yeah. Interesting.
Jury agreed with me.
Yeah.
We took it to a jury. Jury agreed with me, but they came up with a damages number that was something larger than $30,000, which is not supportable by the evidence.
Right.
So we have a whole bunch of post-trial motions in front of him now, and he was a little. This is before he got busy with this case. Not particularly proactive as a judge. It was great fun, though. In any event.
And you think he should be impeached and removed?
No, I'm against the whole impeachment approach.
I heard you guys arguing about the president unnominating judges and having taking away their salary.
If that was last Friday, I wasn't there.
Okay.
That was
the Friday before.
I do not believe that impeachment is appropriate for judges being bad judges. I think, frankly, if the Supreme Court would do its job and wake up a little bit earlier in the morning and maybe work over the summer like the rest of us, a lot of the judicial activism that conservatives complain about would have been addressed and even prevented by now. But the Supreme Court, for all the reasons that everybody ascribes to Roberts and his philosophy, is they have allowed the perfect to be the enemy of the good, such that innumerable circuit splits and bad decisions are left hanging out. The circuit courts really run this country now. In any event, no, he should not be. He should not be impeached. Although I wouldn't mind a close look at the manner in which he was assigned the case, because I will tell you from my own experience, assignment of judges to cases is not random. Everyone who litigates in federal courts knows it's not random. Some judges get certain kinds of cases all the time, and that's a problem. The judicial conference needs to look at it. I don't really think Congress has any business looking at it.
Look at the conduct of the government here, Ron. I mean, he couldn't have known in advance that the government was going to be as sneaky and underhanded as they were during the course of this matter? So, for example,
that brings up the next important question,
okay,
which is, can you do this? Let's say you have a valid, not the picking up somebody arbitrarily off the street, but you want to make a test case, or you want to conscientiously invoke the Alien Enemies Act against this gang.
Yeah,
that's interesting. That's creative. I'm all for that.
It's stupid, Ron. It's not in keeping with the.
But if your hold that point. If your employment of that remedy is dependent on your timing with respect to before the judge hears it, so that you can say, "Oh, they're out of it. They're out of our jurisdiction now." I've got a problem with that. In other words, it shouldn't matter. It is true that Boasberg didn't have jurisdiction over them once they got up on that plane, but that should not be the way you execute policy.
Well, I guess I have.
Let's do it before the judge.
Yeah, so I'm glad you say that. It's very obviously what they were doing was to try to escape judicial review in that context. They've done it in many other instances before.
So as a policy matter, Pisco, I don't see how that's a win. I think that's a loss. Whenever you do something that looks like you're hiding from the judge or evading a ruling, you're not winning. You're only making the judiciary more suspicious of you. You're undermining your legitimacy, and you're not testing the legality of something that you do presumably.
Yeah, if you were
under
good
color of law.
If your side, I have to say, not everyone on your side, but most of the prominent, talking heads on your side were good faith, of course you would be correct. But they're all talking about, Marshall has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. They're all following J.D. Vance's line, and that the judiciary cannot act, and we don't need to listen to any judge. I mean, they're all saying this stuff because that's what they believe. They believe themselves to be above the law, or at least above judicial review. And I can give you 2, 3, 4, 5 examples where the administration has done something specifically to evade judicial review. If you want, we can go through them. I think for me, the most prominent example.
Let's do that.
For me, one of the best examples is the spending freeze. Initially, there was a spending freeze from the Office of Management and Budget. The then acting head of the Office of Management and Budget. He issued a policy. It was like a 2-page memorandum that said all federal financial assistance must pause, must stop, must cease, must be frozen. And he defined it as to exclude Social Security, Medicare, but not Medicaid. And there was a TRO because obviously Congress controls the purse strings, and if you want to do things according to you want to make temporary freezes, you have to follow the law. Congress has made remedies for these kinds of situations where the executive needs to temporarily halt the payments of stuff. And so that was the situation. There was a TRO, and so what does the Trump administration do? The Office of Management and Budget sends out an email that says, we are rescinding the memo. We're rescinding this previous memo of the federal financial spending freeze. And then what does this 27-year-old Carolyn Levitt go out and say in response to questions? We've rescinded the memo, but we haven't rescinded the policy. And they're in court arguing that, Judge, you can't review this spending freeze policy because the memo is not in force. The memo having been rescinded in our follow-up memo, there's nothing for you to review, Judge. So we've signaled, we've sent out the memo, then we've rescinded it, and now there's nothing for you to review, Judge. But we've said vocally, orally, that the policy has not changed at all. And the court, in maintaining the TRO on that spending freeze, said it was a clear and obvious attempt, and I can show you the opinion that says so, to escape judicial review in that context. It was so obvious. I mean, why would you do that? What explains you rescinding the memo, but keeping the same exact policy, other than trying to escape judicial review?
So the judges agreed that they would be irreparably harmed. That strikes me as a tactic that failed, right? And so the judge left the TRO in place.
Yes, the judge left the TRO in place, and it was an attempt. It was an attempt to evade judicial review. What I'm telling you is the whole point.
But ultimately, they went back to court, right? And the court said that's not going to work.
Yes, the court said that's not going to work. But what I'm trying to tell you is that's the attempt.
At that junction, they said, "F you, judge, we're doing what we want," or they listened to the judge.
Well, they're still that is unclear, and that's being developed. Just to be clear.
Okay.
But their
intent. What you don't like is an aggressive and apparently not very well advised tactic that the judge didn't buy, and they ultimately listened to what the judge said, which is you can't. That doesn't cut it.
I don't want to say that they ultimately listened to what the judge said. I don't want to make that representation, but I certainly am just pointing out that it is of accord with what they did in this case with respect to the Alien Enemies Act. Is they're trying to put people on planes, send them to El Salvador before there's a chance to vindicate any kind of case or the rights of these individuals, and before there's a chance for judicial review, to do it as fast and as quickly as possible. And that's just one example of their attempt to do so.
I will say this much: there is an unusual policy challenge that has been placed when you have a situation where the previous administration has lawlessly refused to enforce the law with respect to immigration and allowed millions of illegals in. To say that we will now require each illegal that has been let in by virtue of the previous administration's refusal to enforce the law will now be entitled to a full Article 3 hearing presents a definite policy problem.
It's a policy problem. And should they follow the law? Should the government follow the law?
Yes, the previous government should follow the law, and this government should follow the law. And in fact, one of the things Pam Bondi impressed me with, one of the only time I ever worked with her, was when we were at the Philadelphia Convention Center in 2020, trying to observe the counting of mail ballots, which we had a court order allowing us to do, but the Philadelphia Elections Board refused to follow. Someone said, "Well, why don't we just rush the door? Why don't we?" And she said, "No, that's not what we're here for. We're not here to demonstrate that we don't follow the law. We're here to follow the law."
Right. So it might be inconvenient, right? It might be inconvenient that you have to give it might be inconvenient you have to give hearings to people, but that's the law. And if you don't like the law, if people don't like the law,
it may or may not be the law. I think under the Alien Enemies Act, it doesn't. They're not entitled to. Well, it might have been entitled to.
They're entitled to an opportunity to file a habeas petition and to have it heard in a court.
You definitely listen. Like I said, if your policy is dependent on sneaking out in the middle of the night, it's not legitimate.
That's what they're doing, Ron. That's what they're doing. They're sending them over to the gulag.
So let me hear number two. But let me hear number two. So the spending freezes, or you want to say number three? Because number two is the MS-13.
Just be careful.
You said you had like five of them.
Yeah, so that's Tren de Aragua. So there's the Alien Enemies Act deportation. That's separate from the alleged MS-13. This is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So that's three. So number one, spending freeze. Number two, Alien Enemies Act deportations under Tren de Aragua. Number three, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I'm going up to my newsletter where I can find more for you. So with respect to the deletion of agencies, right? They promised, for example, to delete the Department of Education. That was a promise. They've stopped short of officially, or the CFPB is another example, right? The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They've stopped short of officially like decommissioning those agencies, but have effectively stripped them of all funding, of, fired all their employees, or at least a lot of their employees, shut down their offices. So that's another attempt, right, to try. Again, I have a list somewhere that it's not coming to mind, but it's just a consistent pattern of this. Yeah.
But evidently the president has the power to do that.
You think the president has the power to render useless the agencies that have been statutorily enacted by Congress?
If Congress doesn't describe a specific, which it can't because it's executive function, Congress says this is what the agency is going to be, and here's the money for it. It's simply not up to Congress to say here's how many employees it has to have. I don't think that's been overturned. I think, on the contrary, the courts have found that is a not a lawless, but a lawful policy that you don't like.
I think that remains to be seen.
Congress probably has the power to do something about it.
What could they do, right? What could Congress do to insulate their agencies from a rogue president?
Let's be clear. Congress can't do anything these days. Congress is truly a useless organ of the government. I mean, it is a real shame that there is nothing that's considered to be sufficiently uncontroversial that the United States Congress can agree to do it, except on the most partisan lines.
So regardless of the practicalities here, formally, what could a Congress do to insulate their agencies from being stripped apart from a rogue president? And by the way, I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that this policy is lawful. There are some injunctions still in place right now protecting and preventing certain firing bonanzas, like in the CFPB. I think that there are some existing TROs and injunctions that are preventing that. So I don't take it for granted that this action is lawful to do. But what could Congress do if it wanted to protect its agencies from, or the country's agencies from, a rogue president?
Probably constitutionally, you can't do anything. But that doesn't make it unlawful. It means that you don't like how the Constitution works, which is that the president has the power to run the government.
It's your assumption that the executive branch means they can do anything they want with the executive agencies and the departments. I think that is
it's the Constitution's assumption. Because you just said to me, what could Congress do? To which I respond, to which we both agree, apparently nothing.
Well, I don't agree with that.
It certainly can't be that the judiciary, the least democratic branch, should be allowed to say, here's what we're going to do.
Well, no, but when the judiciary does its obligations under Marbury v. Madison to say what the law is, and they read, for example, the enactment statutes of some of these agencies that say there shall be a Department of Education, and that department shall have this, and the third, and you have a president who is explicitly saying that we are going to get rid of this department, notwithstanding the fact that Congress has enacted it. What you're essentially saying is we're at the mercy. All we have to rely on is the good faith of an executive to do, to ensure that the law be faithfully executed. But you've even said right now, at a bare minimum, you should say that's the wrong way to do it, right? If Trump wants to get rid of the Department of Education, he's not taking care that the law be faithfully executed when he guts the Department of Education. You're saying that perhaps it's not a justiciable question.
What you call gutting so you're saying instead of relying on the good faith of the person who was elected by the American people, we should rely on the good faith of a judge who was appointed by the president and who may have only lived in this country for 2 or 3 years, or who may be a Mayflower descendant. That doesn't really make that much of a difference, but who the people have never chosen. In other words, good faith. We're only just arguing over who should be the one to take care.
No, hang on a second. No, we have a law from Congress that Congress is in charge to make the laws and make the agencies, to make the departments, to organize them. And there is that law which should be respected. And we have a situation here where the president of the United States, you're right. So Congress made a Department of Education. The president is saying, I am trying to shut it down. And what you're suggesting is,
and the people who went ahead and elected him.
If they elected him with the understanding that President Trump would institute a monarchy, do you think that he should be allowed to institute a monarchy?
If the Constitution would permit it, yes.
Okay, but you think,
but the Constitution
does not permit, right?
So the Constitution doesn't permit it.
But
the Constitution does permit
the president,
or may very well permit, because there's no other way for the president to run things other than the manner in which he, as executive, executes the law.
So when can, in fact, when will you agree with a judicial ruling preventing the executive branch from doing something, actually? When would that take shape?
That is unconstitutional. It would have to be unconstitutional.
Okay, but why does some judge get to decide what the president's doing is unconstitutional? Right? Why does some judge get to decide that Biden can't forgive all the student loans? Why does some judge get to decide, we voted for Biden, we elected him?
Because listen, we, at the end of the day, the only way the system works is if it's the actors in the respective branches of government act in accordance with the trust that's placed in them. And when they don't, there have to be checks and balances. So judges can be appealed from and their decisions can be reviewed, and the law can be changed, and even the Constitution can be changed, and the president is elected, and he can be, either enjoy. In other words, the answer is, I do hold of Marbury versus Madison. I don't understand. There are a number of people on the right who believe Madison, who say they believe. I think very few of them have really thought it through. And I think a very large number of those who have not thought it through are incapable of doing so. And who say that Marbury versus Madison was a mistake. Then what is the judiciary for? Nothing. Just entirely. We've gone from the necessity of a case or controversy to basically an all advisory opinion judiciary with respect to government conduct, that exceeds or does not meet constitutional requirements. So I'm in the camp of being pro Marbury, but ultimately, I suppose the Supreme Court will rule on this.
Yeah, but so the Supreme Court ruled with Biden. The Supreme Court said, you agree, right, that Biden was the dutifully and lawfully elected president of the United States, right?
Yeah,
you're shaky on it.
Purposes.
For practical purposes.
No. He was acting as president of the United States. I don't think he was compos mentis for at least the last year of his time in office. I don't think he actually executed. I don't think he actually wielded executive power, and I do think his election
was fraudulent.
Was highly irregular. It was fraudulent, but there have been many fraudulent elections before. And there will probably be fraudulent elections in the future. So we have to live with that. At the end of the day,
can I just ask you, because this is, to me, it's insane that people are still spreading these lies. What's the evidence of a fraudulent election in 2020? What's the single strongest piece of evidence?
81 million votes.
Oh my God. Just the size of size of the victory.
The size, the historic size of the victory on behalf of a person who never even won a legitimate primary until 2020, when everyone quit the same night. It's such an obvious fraud. Let's not have that discussion tonight.
We don't have to, but but can you understand how
Biden was the president? Okay. Biden was the president.
I agree with that, but I'll make one note on it, and we can leave it here. But I think it's absolutely shameful that the strongest piece of evidence you have is just the fact that he won. If the fact that he won by those margins is enough to show that it's a fraudulent election.
One thing that you're going to have to do. That's one thing you're going to have to do.
What's that?
In sharpening your not inconsiderable rhetorical skills is to swear off the use of adjectives and epithets. You don't need them. Make your point. Don't say don't use the lie and say it's wrong, say it's incorrect,
say
wrong. It's unsupportable.
Okay. It's
incorrect.
I'll follow your advice. It is wrong and unsupportable. And But I want to go further than that. I want to say it's borderline, psychotic.
I wasn't Philadelphia. Listen, why wouldn't they let observers watch the counting of mail ballots in Philadelphia County? Why not?
So, first of all, with respect to Philadelphia, there were official.
The court ordered that they be allowed.
Yeah, so there were official. So, what oftentimes is conflated are the people that Trump wanted to be in there to see, but there were approved observers and unapproved observers. Fair?
Yes, I'm talking about approved observers under Pennsylvania law, pursuant to a decision of the intermediate appellate court, and when we presented the Philadelphia Board of Elections attorney with the order, she basically made it clear we're not gonna follow it, because they knew that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court would overturn it, but not because she was concerned about what was right, but because once the observers were let in, do you realize what the order ultimately said? Under Pennsylvania law, yes, the observers are let in, but they don't have to. But if you want to put them 50 feet away from where the counting is taking place, so that it is literally impossible to see what they're doing, that comports with Pennsylvania law.
And that's the law.
That's what the lawmakers have in mind.
If that's the law, that's the law. And in fact, I seem to recall there were a lot of changes to election law around COVID and pre-COVID, I should say. For example, Act 77, and which was passed with bipartisan majorities in the Pennsylvania legislature.
So you think that when the legislature said observers should be allowed to observe, all it meant was that they had to be under the same room. So you could have put one of them in Giant Stadium, on the end zone of Giant Stadium, the other one in the other end zone, and if there was a roof on Giant Stadium, they would be valid observed. That was what the legislature intended.
So we don't go by what the legislator intended under originalism. If we're following
we don't. We go by what do the word evince, what intention do the words evince? When you refer to somebody as an observer,
the original public meaning. That's what I'm told. The original public meaning. You could have all the intent in the world.
You're confusing constitutional interpretation with statutory interpretation.
Why is that?
Original public meaning is not relevant to statutory interpretation.
So for statutory interpretation, why should we look to the legislator's specific intent as opposed to? So for example, I'm going to give you an example here. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you an example. So there's this case, a Bostock, that went to the Supreme Court. It was interpreting various provisions of anti-discrimination frameworks, statutory frameworks, and what the Gorsuch opinion at the time, this is not a constitutional application, Gorsuch wrote an opinion which said, even though it was not the specific intent of the legislators at the time that these provisions were passed to protect same-sex situations or trans situations, the plain meaning of these texts, sex-based discrimination would include situations for same-sex relations or situations, right? That is an example of the Supreme Court of the United States applying original public meaning analysis to statutory frameworks. And so
Gorsuch was wrong. I mean, that's one of the most disastrous opinions in American constitutional law history, and in terms of social policy and the social effect and the disregard for the democratic process. It was an absolute disaster.
What am I to make of it? I'm just trying to follow the law. I'm just trying to follow the Supreme Court. And so you say that you shouldn't use that framework, whatever. But put aside, I haven't briefed the specific issue of the observers. I'm taking your representation that it was in fact lawful for them to put them away 50 feet. I assume that one of the purposes could be to make sure that no one is that you don't need to see them individually counting the ballots, but just to make sure they're not trucking in a bunch of whatever, right? So I don't know the specifics of the Pennsylvania Philadelphia ballot observer issue. I haven't done these debates in a while, but what I want to be clear is you represented that it was legal.
At every juncture where transparency would have been appropriate and harmless, seemingly harmless, it was opposed by the Democrats because it was a crooked election. But the worst thing that would have happened if the observers, if the statutorily authorized observers had been allowed to actually observe, as opposed to standing in a room across a field, would be that they would have been closer than the people counting them wanted them to be. There was no accusation, no allegation that these people were armed, that they were dangerous, that they were harassing anyone. They wanted to see what was going on, and that was not permitted.
So you think that even though that this process, but what you said, you represented that it was lawfully, that you might not agree with that interpretation, but what you're representing is that was a lawful procedure to force them to a certain distance away from the actual counters, even though it was completely legal. You said that was lawful. You said that was lawful.
I'm saying that was the ultimate conclusion of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Okay.
But I'm allowed to disagree with it. But at the end of the day, that was how the lawful process. But so if you're saying that if the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that black people could not vote,
mm-hmm.
and that was and no one interfered with that, because that we'd be fine with that, right? Because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said it. We believe in positive jurisprudence, in whatever the law, whatever the highest authorities said.
So
we can disagree.
First of all,
we can disagree.
You can absolutely disagree, but where is the evidence that following lawful procedures and having observers at a given distance, X distance, I have no insight that makes you less likely, to observe the kinds of fraud that was intended by the legislature to observe? I'm not really sure. My intuition, I think it's your case to make that it would have been easier.
I'm telling you, it was.
But just to be clear, I'm just going to finish what I'm going to say. So finishing what I'm going to say, that's not evidence of fraud.
So I don't need evidence.
You don't need evidence, right?
If I see I can deduce. If you take enough instances of a desire of questionable statistical phenomena, of counting stopping in the middle of the night for illegitimate reasons.
Wait, stop that? No, we're going to stop that right there. You're talking about Georgia?
Yeah.
So Georgia. What's, because people were complaining that they were counting through the night, and then also complaining that they weren't counting through the night. So what is the appropriate procedure according to Ron?
They were supposed to count through the night. They stopped counting and sent people home. Unprecedented. You never stop counting. You bring in different. You bring in crews. You bring in shifts of people. You don't stop counting. They made up a bullshit story about a plumbing problem. Okay, why did you have to make up a story? And the corruption of the election.
It's your bare assertion that it's a lie. It's your bare assertion that it's a lie, and they brought him back. They brought the counters back.
They brought him back after the period during which observers were able to maintain observation.
It's all on tape. I can't believe you guys are still with this, man. I mean, it's all on tape. They have the ballots on tape.
I can't believe you believe. I can't believe that you believe that the Biden election was legitimate. Wait. Just
to be clear, you recognize that the ballots, what you're referencing is the Rudy Giuliani story. Still to this day, this whole notion that the ballots that were on film, where we can see them going underneath the tables and their containers, their approved ballot containers, that this entire situation where we can see all the counters and it's all on film, that there's evidence of fraud in that situation.
It's not all on film. That's nonsense.
What's
and
wrong?
By the way, Giuliani was utterly railroaded. Yeah. It is one of the all-time crimes against the rule of law in this country that a lawyer, compared to the things that Democrat lawyers have alleged and filed lawsuits claiming with respect to Republican, they
defamed
the idea
them.
That someone would be disbarred.
They defamed them. They defamed them. Giuliani defamed her. It's Ruby Moss and and the other one is Sam
and,
Freeman.
and she suffered $1 billion in damages.
Well,
right?
Hang on a second. He is not complying with discovery. He is, completely flouting the courts in this entire process. And absolutely, they rang their names through the mud. They said that these two individuals who did nothing but their civic duty. Right? As you stand here, you have no evidence, do you, that these individuals did anything wrong? Is that right?
I'm not making the claim, so I don't have to present evidence.
No, I'm saying you're not. Wait, I just want to be clear. Are you or are you not alleging, or is it your belief that they did anything wrong?
Yeah, I believe they did something wrong.
Okay,
sue me too.
You believe they did something wrong? What's the basis of that belief? Because they're black?
All right, that is such a bad. I didn't even know they were black. That is such a bad faith.
What's the basis?
Where'd you pull that out?
Wait. What's the basis to believe they did something wrong? What's the basis to believe they did something wrong? Name it.
The entire manner in which that counting process went was corrupt.
These two individuals. Wait, no. These two individuals. The two individuals that were defamed by Rudy Giuliani.
What are their names? What are their names?
Ruby Moss and Freeman. I forget her first name.
So. These are people who are. How were they affected by this claim by Rudy Giuliani?
Hang on a second.
Did they lose their job? Did they lose their income?
Hang on a second. We're dealing with your claim. You said you believe they did something wrong. What, in fact, do you believe they did wrong? What's the evidence that they specifically did something wrong?
Who was their employer?
So you're not answering the question, right?
No. In order to answer the question, I want information. Who was their employer? The Georgia was it the Board of Elections in Georgia?
Whoever their employer is has some tendency to bear on whether or not they did something wrong.
Yes, because if that's a corrupt organization that operates in a corrupt manner, then they did something wrong.
So they can by the fact that they're employees, they can inherit the negligent, reckless, or evil acts of their employer.
If they participated in them, yes.
Okay. So. I think that these people were employed by whatever Georgia sort of municipality is there. I don't know. They might also have private employers. I'm not sure.
The election authorities in Georgia have been shown to be. They destroyed so many records after that election in violation of the law. No accountability, not from Republicans, not from Democrats. No accountability whatsoever. Why would you destroy records that you are statutorily required to?
Giuliani accused them of fraud, of voter fraud. That's what Giuliani accused them of.
They committed voter fraud.
What's
that?
Voter fraud. Prove that they committed voter fraud. Prove it.
I don't have to prove it to you. I'm just making the statement. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe. I'm not here as a plaintiff.
No, but I mean,
in a fraud claim.
Man to man. These are innocent women, and they were accused. Man to man. These people were accused falsely by Trump. Yeah.
Do you realize that when you didn't like what I had to say, your assumption was to say that I was accusing them because they were black? I didn't even know they were black.
Okay.
Why would you? Where did that come from?
Because
where did that come from?
Yeah, so
is that a rhetorical device
I understand. I understand that you're distracting now from the point, which is there is no evidence. What I said is because they're black. I'm asking because there is no substantive evidence that they did anything wrong. There is no substantive evidence that they did any fraud, and that was it was investigated.
That wasn't the discussion I agreed to have with you tonight.
Well, I understand. I
didn't say let's talk. I'm going to talk to you about why Rudy Giuliani.
We can move on. Hey, listen, Ron. We can move. I'm happy to move on, but go ahead.
Okay, let's move on.
All right. Listen, I just lose my shit when we're continuing to have these repetitive conversations. Listen,
I was on the phone with Rudy Giuliani election night discussing these claims. I was aware of the evidence on which he was acting. I was part of the team, and I was invited to join the team in Washington that ultimately rolled down the hill, and I'm grateful to God that I said I couldn't do it because that Shabbos, my son was making a celebration in honor of the birth of his daughter, and I couldn't join them. I don't know what ultimately happened after our conversation ended, but I will tell you that those of us who were, I was in Pennsylvania that night, on the phone with him and the team, and everything that we were seeing, and I'm talking about stuff about Venezuela or West Germany, any of the or the crazy stuff that came down the pike later, or Belarus, whatever it was. There was so much monkey business there that yes, it's a bona fide claim, and it certainly wasn't, intentional.
You guys tried to steal the election. You realize that? You realize you tried to steal the 2020 election?
No, I don't see it that way at all. I think that Biden did steal the election, and he tried. And I think it's the best thing that ever happened for this country and for Donald Trump that 2020 went the way it did, because the Donald Trump for 2024, 2025 is an immensely more effective weapon for MAGA and for the Trump agenda than he would have been in 2020.
That's ultimately what you care about. Really so I have to ask you what you think of Mike Pence in this whole situation. I mean, Mike Pence, this is I think Mike Pence, I don't know. I hear a lot of shit about what Mike Pence did. I never believed that Mike Pence had the power. And I said this on Twitter, as it was called then, many, many times. People are ascribing to Mike Pence some sort of discretion. This is a ministerial role that he has in certifying the election. It was not his place to do anything other than what he did. Trump tried to pressure him to steal the election using that power.
No, Trump tried to pressure him to utilize his power in a way that Trump,
in a way that you say is illegal.
Advice he was getting.
In a way that you say is illegal.
I don't think it would have been illegal, but I think it would have been very problem. I think it would have raised really.
You think it might have been legal for Mike Pence to declare Trump the victor?
Oh no, we couldn't. I don't see how we could have possibly done that. And I said so at the time.
I'm glad to hear that, but I mean, notwithstanding that, Trump tried to steal the election. He tried to have Pence do that. He tried to have Pence declare them the victor. That's
my reflection is that he tried to get Pence to slow down the process of certifying the election so that the irregularities could actually be addressed. I do think that things got very out of hand in the White House in December and January of 2019, 2020, 2021. I'm not. I wasn't there. Yeah. And there are a lot of there's a lot of contradictory information. I only have like another 15 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Hey, listen.
Let's try to get back.
I appreciate talking. The only reason I have to say all that stuff is because I have to express, and I don't know what happened that you are with these people, but these people are despicable. I mean, Rudy Giuliani is a traitor to the country. They tried to steal his election, and I have to express that to you because I couldn't. I'm genuinely a very cordial person.
I'm okay. I'm completely okay with you expressing that to me.
Okay, cool.
It doesn't do me any harm. It's the kind of thing that I expect from people on the left. They use very extreme language, stealing election. Despicable things like that.
Trump uses that language. Trump uses. You understand? Trump used that today. Trump said that the election was stolen in 2020. So you can't really say, oh, the left uses this bombastic language of stealing the election.
The election was stolen in 2020.
Okay,
but I don't think that Trump tried to steal the election. I think that Trump tried to preserve the election that he believed
at a bare minimum. That's all bullshit. But at a bare minimum, you can say that the point you just made about bombastic language from the left, that's bullshit, right? Because I just shown you that Trump uses that exact same language, and it's not a distinguishing characteristic.
Election, that's the language you're talking about.
What's that?
Stolen election is what you just said.
You just said the left has this exaggerated language of stolen election, and I'm pointing to you and saying, at the very minimum, your semantic analysis cuts both ways because Trump uses the same exact language. That has to follow.
Trump does use very colorful language. I'll grant you that. But I think that most followers don't. His followers. That's 80 million people, right? We have to.
Well, I don't know. 80 million seems inherently not trustworthy. 80 million seems like it couldn't happen.
That's right. That's a number that can never be true.
Yeah. I mean, who can deny? I mean, that's very strong evidence fraud. All right, I know that you have short time. I do still appreciate, by the way, the conversation. I think we ought to have conversations even with people we disagree like strongly on. Taking it back to the present, what would you say in terms of some of Trump's pushing the boundaries of the executive branch? I'm very troubled by that. Put me at ease with that. Or are you also troubled by some of it? What are you troubled about? What do you think I'm overreacting to? Talk me through that.
Well, I think there is definitely I think you're right. I think there is a strategy to reassert the executive, and in particular to pull power back from not Congress and not the judiciary, but from unelected components, unaccountable components of government, including NGOs and permanent bureaucracies. It has reached the point where so much money is going into these entities that no one has the slightest idea what they're doing with it. And it turns out that quite a bit of what they're doing with it is either direct or indirect political activism that is first of all just inappropriate for an inappropriate use of taxpayer money. And to the extent that we as a democracy say we don't want the president controlling that much of the government, that means we don't want there to be that much government, and that's a good thing.
Does it bother you that Doge has not reduced spending at all?
I don't really know. I think it's Congress that has to reduce spending, not Doge. Doge identifies issues that should have been identified probably by the government accounting office.
That's what I thought. Evidently, that's what I thought. But you seem to say that it's okay for the president to stop funding unilaterally to any agency he deems to be a waste of time or money. I thought that it was the president.
The general accounting office is supposed to be an auditing. I understood it to be an auditing function, not a policymaking function. So I don't know why you're.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, I would tend to agree that Congress controls the purse strings, and so if anyone's going to make a cutback on spending, it's going to be, or the scope of government, it should be Congress. Maybe the executive can, trim at the edges and do a couple things here and there, pursuant to their inherent authorities or to congressional enactments. But it doesn't seem that Doge or this downsizing of government has resulted in.
I'm talking about Doge. Your question was, doesn't Trump have a strategy of asserting a level of power, executive power? Right.
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes. And I think that.
Well, how do you feel about it? Is my question. Like, walk me through. Why am I being histrionic?
I didn't say you were being histrionic.
No.
I think it's fine.
Assume that because people will say, Pisco, you're overreacting. You're overreacting. It's not a big deal.
Down. No. I don't think you're overreacting. I think that given your values and your political desiderata, it is a great panic. There's every reason in the world to panic, because if Trump succeeds in starving these U.S. aid, for example, and prohibiting it from funding overseas culture war battles that are obnoxious in the countries where they're being funded and are not democratically enacted even by Congress, then I think that's a great thing. But if you're a leftist and you believe that an elite group of administrators should be allowed to take blocks of grant money and spend them to put rainbow flags all over the world and do this sort of, again, culture war type of stuff, then we disagree. And it's a threat that Trump is trying to prevent that from happening.
I mean, I'm not super well read on the USAID specifics of the grant money. So I have no like specific, I take it to be probably a good use of soft power for America to have, their claws in different areas and able to, leverage that against other countries. I think it's useful from a strategic standpoint, but I have no like specific specialized knowledge on the funding that goes through. I know that a lot of it probably goes to like hungry kids and people who are dying and shit. So I probably want to fund at least some of that. But regardless, my bigger problem is with the structural concern. That is, Congress funded this shit. And so I do have a problem with Trump trying to stymie the clear expressed will of Congress. And that seems to be what his aim is to undermine Article 1 appropriation power. And you seem to be fine with it.
Well, do you believe that he's acting unconstitutionally?
I sure do.
So then I think if the Constitution backs you up ultimately, which I think we will, which is yet to be determined, then it will work the way you want it to work. I do think there is a strong argument that the Constitution doesn't back you up, and that only the president can take care. Only the president, that the entire reason that the president is elected by the entire nation is to effectuate policies. And if you say that the only policies he can effectuate are ones that are mandated by Congress as approved by the judiciary, then why do you have it?
Here's the example. So let's say, for example, Congress appropriates, I don't know, let's call it $60 billion worth of funds to, let's say, the state of Israel. Can the president decide, I'm not going to send that money?
I think he can. I think that presidents do that because it's within the national security power of the president. A bad example. Let's talk about something domestic.
All right, let's talk about
that's too easy.
Let's talk about something domestic. I disagree with that, but let's talk about something maybe easier for me, I guess, which would be, let's say that the Congress says we want to spend, let's call it $200 billion on infrastructure for let's say something like green energy. Can the president say, no, we're not going to do that?
Yeah. So didn't Nixon lose on that? Didn't Nixon lose in the sequestration cases in the 1970s?
There was
I don't actually.
There's a Chadha case, and there's.
I don't claim.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm not particularly knowledgeable about what the
But is it even conceivable, right, that the president has the inherent executive authority to just stop any funding that Congress passes? Is there any funding that Congress could pass that the president can halt?
That doesn't sound right, right? It doesn't sound right. Doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I don't think it sounds right, and I think it's but that is essentially what Russell Vought is claiming and Trump is claiming.
I suppose the problem, though, is Congress often, or probably usually, allocates money for very broad purposes. So the effectuation of the broad purposes are left to the executive. And Congress doesn't want to get into the weeds of being more specific when it allocates money, because that would require hard political choices that Congress doesn't want to make. So they leave it to the president and to the permanent bureaucracies. And what the executive and what Trump, I think, is appropriately doing here is saying, Congress, if you want to say that I have to spend $30 million on mosquito nets, I'll buy mosquito nets. But if you say $30 million to alleviate suffering, then I'm going to decide what alleviate suffering means.
Listen, I
think that is what's going on.
If it's written, I think that there could definitely be different cases in different situations. And I certainly think, for example, it is not responsible for Congress constantly to be writing in such broad terms and to be passing these CRs. On that, I think I totally agree. I just think that the Republicans have done nothing to advance the specificity of what's happening here. I think, the House Republicans in particular are just useless. They can't govern.
But to
be 100% clear, there will be some cases where it'll be generic, like you said, and maybe I can acknowledge that the president can allocate it some way versus the other. And there even is some, I would even recognize that under the Impoundment Control Act, that there are situations in which the president, temporarily can do certain actions. But we're talking about something completely different. We're talking about the president's authority, his claimed authority, to like halt all federal financial assistance totally, right? And I first of all don't know what would stop the president of the United States under that theory from just like pausing all Social Security checks, because he says, we need to audit it, right? We need to audit what's going on with Social Security.
Social Security. The problem with that example, right, is that we operate under this preposterous legal fiction of a trust fund. So it is different. But let's say, think of a million other benefit programs, right? Entitlements. If you have entitlements, right, that are regular, plain vanilla explicitly taxpayer funded entitlements, could the president say, we're not going to pay veterans benefits anymore?
Yeah, that's a great example.
Because I don't see how he could.
But basically, that's the kind of conduct that we're seeing. Now, he's not touching a lot of the stuff. He is actually touching very important stuff. And for example, they're with Social Security and some of the regulations there. But let's just put that aside. Some of the stuff they're not touching because they know of the political ramifications. But in essence, they're saying there's a lot of fraud here, so we have to put a pause until we figure out what the going on, and we got to actually pause everything before we look into the fraud. And if they wanted to, I think that they would claim the authority to pause anything on the basis of we need to audit it for fraud. That's what they're doing with a lot of these agencies, and I mean, it just seems to be the MO.
If the president has the constitutional power to do that, then I think it's a great thing that he does it. And if he does not, then I believe that he will be prohibited from doing it. And if the courts properly, valid if a valid order from a legitimate U.S. court with proper jurisdiction and on behalf of a plaintiff with the appropriate standing concludes that the president can't do it, then that's how it's going to be. Let me just tell you something, Pisco. Yeah. When in 2020, I was involved in a lot of litigation involving COVID lockdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Gross constitutional violations that were permitted, that were promulgated by, it's depending on the state,
Republicans and Democrats,
governors, legislatures, and rubber stamped by judiciaries. And I would make the same kind of argument along the lines of, if you're going to say that the police power is so compelling under the Constitution, police power which doesn't even appear in the Constitution.
There is no. Hang on, wait. I just want to pause right there because I think it's an interesting question. It's one for people. So when he's referencing the police power, it's not the power of the police. It's a term meant to the general
legislation. The ability of the state to govern.
Right, but what I want to say here is you wouldn't expect that the Constitution reference a general police power because the federal government does not have a general police power, and the states are the ones that have the general police power, and they're assumed as part of the Constitution. They don't owe their existence to it.
It's axiomatic to having a government that it has to be able to do things. Having said that, we were left without relief in many cases because that's the way the Constitution was set up. If the courts agree that the executive has this power, then your only recourse is going to be to vote for executives in the future who are more to your liking, to vote for legislators who will draft more specific legislation, or to live with it.
Yeah.
And that's it. The Constitution. I'm not one of these things that always bugs me, Pisco, is
and
I think it's more common on the right than on the left. This idea that the Constitution is a sort of I think it's inspired, and I think that the in many respects it demonstrates a brilliance that is quite impressive, but it's not a religious principle. It's not divine. And this idea that we should worship the Constitution. I mean, we have to agree that we're going to live in it's a constitutional republic, and we're going to follow the Constitution. But we should not be afraid to acknowledge when it fails, and
Yeah.
when it when change would be well advised.
On that word,
and on that note, I'm going to ask.
No, I know. I want to respect your time, and so I want to give you, close out here. I just have one more question for you, and but I do appreciate the time. And listen, it got acrimonious there, but I take nothing personal. I'm happy to continue this chain of dialogue.
I don't take any of this.
I
don't take any of this personal, including the fact that you accuse me of being a
I asked the question. I asked the question. You did have a funny joke during one of the podcasts about. I guess he's not black, and I think it was a reference though to what Joe Biden said. It was in some context. I think it might not have been you. It might have been Sean, criminal Sean. I don't know actually. I'm not remembering it, but I do appreciate your time. Yeah, but
this was fun. I hope that your listeners felt that we had an honest discussion, and that's all I can really ask.
No, sure. And so I just have one last question, and then I'll do one last question, and then I'll let you go. Which is, if the Supreme Court issues a direct order to President Trump, and if the President Trump does not follow it, will you condemn him for that?
I will condemn the decision. I think it would be a grave mistake, and I think that everyone I know in the administration believes the same thing.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ron, for taking the time. Really appreciate the discussion. Let's keep the communication open. I love talking with people I disagree with. Sure. And yeah, thank you. I know it was late, and I appreciate it.
And it's so rare. It's so rare, and I give you all the credit in the world, Pisco, for having someone on who's not brain damaged, and I don't think I am brain damaged, who can mix it up with you, because it's really hard for me to find debating partners, because most people on the left don't want to have the discussion. So I give you all the credit in the world.
Hey, appreciate that,
Good
Ron.
night.
Yeah, have a good one. Bye-bye. What is there to say, folks? I didn't know that he interfaced with Giuliani. That was news to me. Pretty cooked. I mean, I appreciate his time and stuff, and happy to talk with him again. I like debating people who disagree with me. But like, what is there to say, right? We start off that conversation. He's like, I'm not going to call out illegal actions and bad actions. I wouldn't tweet out, Mr. Trump, don't do this, because it's bad for my political side. Isn't that a definition of a hack? Like, imagine that I admitted that, right? That, yeah, I will not call on the Democrats to do something that I believe to be wrong because it will hurt me politically. It's wild. The 2020 stuff is just completely cooked. He alleged that these people who he doesn't even know, right? I guess who they are. He believes they committed election fraud. They still think the 2020 election was stolen. These are, by the way, these are the more intellectual members of what I would consider to be the cult. I do, and if Ron's listening, I do consider you to be a member of a cult. I'm sure you consider me to be a member of a cult. I think one of us is much closer to being empirically correct on that. But this guy, I assume he reads the news. He's not in an epistemic bubble necessarily. I'm assuming he's exposed to the counter arguments. And so if someone like this, right, continues to believe the election is stolen, we're in trouble.